For many, anger's a scary emotion and one that's to be avoided at all costs. Many of us were told messages outright that anger is not becoming, not useful, and that good people, often women, shouldn't get angry.
Hey there, my name is Dr. Beth Russell, and I want to know, what would you do if you were not afraid? Right now. What would your life, your job, your relationships look and feel like if you could be unapologetically you? What's holding you back? This podcast is for anyone that wants to make a change but isn't sure where to start. Let's look inward together and let's talk about you and me, our mental health, our self-care, inner and outer selves, and all that makes us, well, us. It's time to get real, feel the feels, challenge what's holding us back, and connect. This is the Authentic and Brave podcast.
In the introduction of this podcast, I ask you, what would you do if you were not afraid? And while I like to discuss how fear can hold us back, today I want to talk about another emotion that we often experience but aren't sure how to accept: anger. I want to demystify what anger is a bit, normalize it, and change how we see it. In the past few months, I've been challenged to feel and express my own anger at a few situations. It hasn't been easy. I don't like being angry, but the more I work at allowing anger not to be negative and shame myself for feeling it, the more I don't shy away from expressing it. Okay, so let's jump in. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you were angry? I mean, really angry, right at the pit of your stomach angry. What did it feel like? How did you know? And also, how did you express it? When I asked someone in therapy these questions, I met with a blank stare or a quick response of, but I don't get angry. People will continue on and say, I was frustrated a bit, but I wasn't angry. It's so interesting because we know that frustration is a feeling, but it really is driven by the emotion of anger. If you want to know a little bit more about the differences between feelings and emotions, go ahead and go back and listen to episode 20 of this podcast where I explain it. For purposes of our conversation, it really doesn't matter that much. Frustration, annoyance, anger, they're all in the same ballpark. And often we do whatever we can to avoid them. So why do we shy away or flat out deny being angry? Well, it has a lot to do with our childhood, the messages we were told about anger, our observations about who is allowed to be angry and who isn't, and the consequences of what happens when someone gets angry. In my house, my dad was allowed to be angry, or what I now realize is he was allowed to be angry, but also to lash out. When I or one of my siblings were angry, we would either suppress it or we would also lash out. In our house, there weren't a lot of discussions of how we felt or expressions in healthy ways where we label what we felt and we talked about it. We often just modeled what we saw from our parents. When we would stomp our feet or slam the door, we'd be sent to our rooms or even punished. My parents were not comfortable with anger, and so we didn't have the tools to express it in a healthy way. Despite growing up in a loving home, my parents completely bonked on teaching us about anger and how to express it. Recently, I was talking with a client about anger. She described a situation with a friend whose party she hadn't been invited to. This is a situation I think all of us can relate to from time to time. From an outsider's perspective, not being invited to a friend's party would hurt our feelings and would make us mad or angry. My client was quick to say she was sad about being left out, but definitely not angry. When I pushed a little bit further, she admitted that anger scares her. She doesn't want to be out of control, to yell, or to hurt another person. What she described to me was not in fact anger, but what so many people think anger is, lashing out in aggression. Anger isn't yelling, screaming, and being out of control. Tension and anxiety cause those things when coupled with anger. So let's back up a moment and define anger, and then I'll circle back to tension versus anger. According to research, anger is a complex emotion that involves a combination of physiological, cognitive, and behavioral responses. Basically, all of our bodily systems are engaged. It is typically triggered by a perceived threat, injustice, frustration, or interference with one's goals or desires. For many, anger is a scary emotion and one that's to be avoided at all costs. Many of us were told messages outright that anger is not becoming, not useful, and that good people, often women, shouldn't get angry. Many of us were raised to fear anger in ourselves and others. Think about it for a moment. As a child, who in your house was allowed to be angry? Who's the first person that comes to mind? What did they do? How did they act? Did they act out or lash out? Was there a lot of yelling, loud noises, slamming doors? Was there a lot of tension in the room? What did everyone else around the angry person do? Or what did everyone else in the room do around the person that was lashing out? Often as children, when a parent or loved one was angry, we quickly tuned into them. We paid attention to their every move, the way they breathed, the way they sighed. We watched carefully, assessing for safety, tuning into how we needed to act to appease the adult in the room. In that moment, safety became our main goal. We put aside our own needs and emotions to match what was going on with others or to manage them first out of our own need for safety. Our human brain is hardwired to prioritize the recognition of threats. In those moments in our childhood homes, we learned a lot about anger and how we're supposed to respond. And so we respond the same way in adulthood, only to realize that what happened in our childhood homes wasn't healthy and that violence or aggression and lashing out was often mislabeled as anger. For many of us, anger was associated with that aggression, violence, and lack of safety. We've come to believe that anger's bad, negative, and label it as something to be avoided. It makes us afraid, and we do anything and everything we can to shy away from feeling it. But what if that loud screaming, door slamming, and aggression isn't truly what anger is? Just stay with me for a minute and I'll say some more. Picture in your mind a 6-month-old baby. She's lying on the floor and someone takes a toy away from her and she gets angry. How does she respond? If no one comes to soothe her, distract her, or give her back the toy, what happens? Given that she can't talk or walk, she has to express her anger in the moment without defenses. She most likely will cry, ball up her little fist, possibly pound them on the ground, hold her breath until her face is deep red. Her body might shake, or she might tense her whole body. Now, as a parent, many of you are quickly wanting to go in and soothe her. I get it. I don't like it when a baby cries either. But just for the sake of this visualization, what if you left her there? What would happen? Eventually, her crying would lessen or even stop. She would find her thumb, her breathing would return to normal, she'd find something else to focus on, or most likely she'd fall asleep. While her crying may have been loud, she didn't yell, hit anyone, or blame anyone else. She didn't have that ability. She felt the sensations of anger without judgment or shame, expressed them, and eventually regulated or soothed herself. Are you a fan of young adult fiction, magic, and adventure? Then you won't want to miss Kindreds, the thrilling new fantasy novel from author B.B. Russell. Join our heroine, 16-year-old Lila, after the death of her last living relative when she reconnects with a boy named Joey from her childhood who harbors a secret. Needing to know what it is, Lila follows him and finds herself in Carnival Noliana, a disappearing world of magic and wonder, hidden just beyond the veil of the ordinary that is looking for 10 new members. With Noliana set to disappear at the end of Masquerade in 4 days, Lila must decide if she should follow her heart and Joey into Noliana for good, or trust her instincts and intellect that Noliana may not be what it seems. With unforgettable characters, a battle between listening to one's head or one's heart, and heart-pounding action, Kindreds is the perfect choice for anyone who loves young adult fantasy. So don't wait, pick up your copy today and embark on an epic adventure you won't soon forget. Kindreds by B.B. Russell is now available at your favorite bookstore. Or at www.authenticandbrave.com/kindreds, KINDREDS. One of the arguments I hear often as a therapist is that if I get angry, I'll never come out of it. But anger, and all emotions really, come and go. They're a wave. Sometimes the waves last longer than we would like, but they do come and go. I want to point out that while the baby was angry, she wasn't violent, aggressive, or mean. She experienced anger internally first. So when people get angry, they often experience changes in their heart rate, their heart beats faster, their blood pressure increases, often the muscles tighten in the body, their bodies release adrenaline, which often energizes them, their breathing quickens, and it becomes not as deep. Sometimes for adults, we experience digestive issues and may even have difficulty sleeping. I once had a therapist who described anger as a quiet, powerful knowing that is unshakable. That when we really get in touch with it, it allows us to move forward without doubt or uncertainty. It makes us assertive. It doesn't have to be loud or aggressive. In her book, Atlas of the Heart, shame researcher Brené Brown describes anger as a catalyst, an emotion we need to transform into something life-giving. See, anger can have a positive physical effect, and that it can help motivate us to get us up and doing something. When we're angry, our brains are primed for fast reactions. If there's danger or a social threat that triggers an angry state, we're more likely to act on it, that fight or flight response. How we act on our anger is related to how we first recognize, understand, and label it. Expressing and regulating it come after.
Are you tired of feeling held back by fear? It's time to break free and live life unafraid. Are you ready to get real? Spend some time journaling and coloring to face what's holding you back? Introducing the 30 Days to Unafraid Coloring Affirmation Journal. Color away and process your fears with empowering mandalas for self-care. This journal is your roadmap to conquering fear and embracing change with confidence. Don't let fear control your life any longer. Order your copy of 30 Days Unafraid today and take the first steps towards a life without limits. Visit www.authenticandbrave.com/unafraid or find the journal 30 Days Unafraid Coloring Affirmation Journal on Amazon. It's time to unleash your potential and live unafraid. Get your copy now.
So let's go back for a minute to the tension versus anger part. Can you think of a time when you got angry and lashed out? We all do it. All done it at least once in our life. What were you feeling in the moment? Where did you feel it? Was it an instant response? Had you been holding on to frustration for a while and then it finally came out? What did it look like? What did it sound like? A few weeks ago, my husband and I got into, well, let's call a heated discussion. The day before, we'd been discussing a change I wanted to make in my career. While he was supportive of what I wanted, it also scared him. Without going into a lot of detail, because I'll talk about it in a later episode on the podcast, the change would impact our financial situation in the short term, and this really did bother him. He made a couple of comments that made me mad. In the moment, though, I tried to stay calm and I just tuned into what he was saying, so I stuffed down that I was mad or angry, and I shut down the exchange eventually. The next day, I brought it up again, only this time I'd been stewing on it for a day, and the tension I had been holding around it fueled a louder, more defensive conversation. His comment from the day before had been swimming around in my head, and when we talked about it again, there was a lot of tension between us. We raised our voices and each had a perspective that differed from each other. It wasn't so much a problem that we had different perspectives, it was that we really began yelling at each other. We've learned through our relationship that we don't communicate well that way, which isn't a bad thing. After a little while, we both calmed down and tried to hear the other person's perspective. I bring this up because while I was angry at him for his comments, I was also extremely tense. Had I expressed to him the day before, when I was first mad at his comments, the tension wouldn't have been so high, and I wouldn't have raised my voice or lost sleep over it the night before. My lashing out had more to do with the tension I had been holding around being mad than actually being mad at him. When I'm working with clients, I often discuss the difference of tension versus anger as a dropped soda bottle. Have you ever dropped or really shaken a 2-liter of soda? What happens inside the bottle? The carbonation builds up and there's a lot of bubbles. There's a lot of waves. There's a lot of motion, right, with the liquid. What happens in that moment if you take the top off? An explosion. And no matter how fast or how hard you try to put the top back on quickly, It's nearly impossible without first a huge mess. The explosion and the mess is how anger is when mixed with tension. It leads to aggression, yelling, and often worse. The bubbles are the anger that happens inside of us. If we allow it to settle, take time to allow ourselves to recognize what's going on, understand, and label, we won't explode. When the tension is too great and one more thing happens and we can't hold it in anymore, we explode, we lash out, and often do things or say things we aren't proud of. See, it's not anger that's the problem. It's the tension and the fact that we've been holding it all in. We need to let out our emotions as we feel them. And one way to do this that I've been discussing throughout is through using Ruler. Ruler is an acronym for how we deal with emotions. And I talk about it in episode 20 of the podcast. I really suggest you tune into that.
When we feel angry, like any other emotion, we need to notice how it feels in our body, understand why we feel that way, label it, express it, and eventually regulate it. Expressing and regulating anger are often really difficult for people. Doing these in a healthy way takes time to figure out what you need to do. A few suggestions include allowing yourself to be angry in the moment when you feel it. I know that's easier said than done. Engaging in breath work, using meditation, using cognitive restructuring techniques to reframe your thoughts, being assertive but not aggressive in your communication, and using active listening and empathy as you navigate your anger and others. Sometimes even exercise or therapy can help. I hope today's podcast was helpful if you are someone who struggles to allow yourself to be angry. You're not the only one. Anger is a complex emotion that we often have strict internal beliefs about. If you want to learn more, please reach out on Instagram or join our Authentic and Brave Facebook group. And if you don't mind, please share this episode with someone you feel would benefit and make sure to like it on whatever platform you're listening to. Until next time, keep on being authentic and brave. Thank you so much for listening to the Authentic and Brave podcast. I want to remind our listeners that the content of this podcast is not a substitute for professional therapy or medical advice. The information shared in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you are experiencing a mental health issue or any other medical concern, we strongly encourage you to seek help from a licensed professional. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, also called NAMI, helpline is a great resource and can be reached at 1-800-950-NAMI or 1-800-950-6264. Thanks so much for tuning into the Authentic and Brave podcast. If you want more, head over to the authenticandbravepodcast.com for show notes and sign up for the mailing list so you'll never miss an episode. If you're looking for inspiration, connection, and people like you and me, be sure to join my exclusive community on Facebook. The link's waiting for you at authenticandbravepodcast.com. This is Dr. Beth Russell signing off. See you next time.